It's the Jump Leap Long Term Podcast, episode 16. You're starting a fresh strategic planning effort, but you're concerned that executives are not doing enough to engage their stakeholders. From past experience, you know that plans can fall on their face once they are announced. But what should be done to ensure effective post retreat implementation or post offsite implementation? You've heard a number of ideas, but will they fit into the culture of your company? It seems to involve more than just completing a successful retreat, printing out a bunch of copies of a document, sending them to everyone, and then declaring victory. Ha ha ha. You need your own approach to engage stakeholders, or you risk the whole thing becoming a wasted exercise. Tune into this episode to hear from me and my special guest, Anthony Taylor, as we solve this wicked problem in strategic planning together. I'm Francis Wade, and welcome to the Jump Leap Long Term Strategy Podcast. And welcome back. And as you can see, we're joined by my guest, Anthony Taylor. But before I introduce Anthony, let me do a couple of things. One is let me welcome you as a guest. And if you're never listened to this podcast before, you may wonder what the heck is going on. It's a little bit different than most podcasts where a guest is invited on and the guest is interviewed. This is not an interview. This is very different. In this particular case, I've invited Anthony on to come help me solve this problem. It's a problem that both of us have faced in our work. And we have a number of techniques and approaches, and I imagine philosophies that similar or dissimilar, we'll find out. And we're going to be hacking away at the problem for the next how many minutes that we actually spend up talking about it. And as we talk, what we're looking to do is to accomplish an insight, some kind of serendipitous kind of finding that either one of us has never heard before or both of us have never heard before. That's kind of like the holy grail. We come up with something brand new. But the point is to have a conversation and to come up with stuff that you would not ordinarily or necessarily hear, just in the normal course of things. Maybe a few things that can I'd say, go against the conventional wisdom. And as we come up with these insights, you're going to hear an insight bell. And I'll put the insight bell in sort of after we've done the recording. But if we get to the end of the conversation and don't have any insights to share, you'll hear a buzzer, which means that we basically ran out of time. It's all in fun. But we're following what Einstein said. He said if he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and only 5 minutes thinking about solutions. So we're going to be diagnosing the problem in a way that we hope will shed some light, some fresh light on the issue of implementing strategy. And so Joan, let me tell you about Joan. Once again, she's in charge of spearheading her company's corporate strategic planning effort. She is a capable project manager, okay, PMI certified. And this is her third strategy project. The past two plans had some great ideas, but the bulk of the projects in those plans were never implemented. And each year, the executives do seem to be completely supportive of the plans that they have created. There's a lot of good buzz. But in the past, all of the employees lower in the organization have shown little or no interest. So there's no implementation happening. And while the plans do call for employees to play active roles, they're pretty busy meeting some immediate deliverables, the typical short-term targets that they're actually paid and hired to produce, and they never are able to shift gears from short-term to long-term. Also, to make things interesting, why not? The board members have also not been involved. Each year or each prior planning cycle, they have given a rubber stamp to the strategic plan, and they've said they've blessed the new 5 or 10-year plan. They may have read the document, nobody's sure, but not much else. Decisions that they're supposed to make, those kind of just get rolled over from one year to the next. So this year, Joanne wants to make things be very different. Actually, she's up for a promotion, but her bosses made it very clear to her that this part of her job, this whole implementing the strategy bit, needs to be fixed before she can be really considered for the next level. So, Anthony Taylor is the CEO of SME Strategy. He runs a consulting firm and also has his own podcast entitled Strategy and Leadership. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hi, Francis. Good to be here. Joanne, we're here to help you. Really look forward to our conversation. And it's especially timely for us because, we're always looking at how to deepen stakeholder engagement and the work that we're doing. So we're looking forward to digging deep into the problem with you, Francis.
Cool. What do you think of Joanne's situation? Typical, atypical? Is it exaggerated? Do you see it a lot?
I think I see it in some places and don't see it in others. So it's not always like that, but when it happens, it hurts. And so, especially since Joanne's career and future promotion are on the line, the future of the company is effectively on the line. It's a big problem that we get to tackle today. But yes, it's definitely not uncommon, I'll say.
Well, let's start with that because I would say I see it almost always happening. The you have better clients than I do, obviously. but our clients typically are not used to thinking about spending time on long-term activities. So when the strategy is done, or even in the preparation for it, and during and after, they honestly, I think they honestly believe that this is like telling someone to work on a project for the next 2 weeks. They treat it with the same level of, I would say, casual kind of, as if it were anything else with a short time frame where there's a big deliverable that somebody's going to do the job on it. But it seems to me they have the wrong mindset. So I see the problem often, but you're saying you don't see it that often. You see some who are exceptional.
The fact that
How come?
either there's no interest, so Joanne's organization, there's a lot of stuff. Projects in the past, strategic plans are not implemented. So I just say, why is that? There's no interest in the plan. Why is that? They're too busy. Why is that? Maybe they're incentivized wrong, but say, hey, why is that? And then why is the board not engaged? So holistic disengagement like that is a major problem. And then what I would say kind of more frequently is, you see it at different levels. The flip side is you could have engaged people doing the wrong things. I would almost rather have them be disengaged because it's easier to get them on board than engaged in, call it, contrarian activities. That one's kind of harder to deal with, and we see that as well. But what I hear is,
we gotta talk about that.
Yeah.
Tell me about the ones that you've seen who are, and I love the distinction you just drew because, in a way, the strategic planning team, and Joanne and her and company and her executives are kind of working against the flow or against the culture of their organization in many cases, because most people, 99% of the people in the company have never been in a strategic planning meeting ever. They don't know what happens inside of it. They don't know the mindset that's needed. And they sometimes just make fun of the whole thing, or they say that the whole thing is a waste of time. So some are ignorant of, many are ignorant, I'd say almost all, because until you get to the C-suite, you don't really know what a strategic planning conversation looks like. And that lack of knowledge could lead you, I guess, to disengage because you don't know what's going on. But it could also make you kind of fearful because you think it's something nefarious or it's something top-down, authoritarian. So you hear strategy and you could kind of turn off. But you're saying you've run into people who hear a strategy and they turn against it. Tell us about that a little bit.
Well, so I know we're not solving the problem, but I really love how you said, and hopefully we get a bell for this one. But it's about the perspectives and beliefs. It's like someone's belief about a thing is true. And so if you think the strategic plan is bad, it's bad. If you think the strategic plan is good, is good. If you don't know anything about a thing, you're going to put your own beliefs, past experience around it. We call it kind of the curse of knowledge. You could have been at a previous company where there was a strategic plan that happened and then a bunch of people got fired. They could be totally unrelated, but you're putting those two together. Or, you were part of a strategic plan and the last time it didn't go well. Therefore, this time it's not going to go well. It absolutely has no bearing. But if that's what people think, then that's true. They could also say, oh, strategic plan, I'm going to look up strategic plan, and therefore I know what strategic plan means. Whereas your organization could have a totally different context, a totally different perspective, a totally different methodology, but they're filling in the blanks. And so, Joanne would be well served at, just checking what is the alignment. And I think that's, part of the, jump leap kind of methodology, or at least thinking about it, is being curious about where people are at.
Yeah. And I also imagine that people like you or I, SME consulting, or someone from framework consulting, we walk in and people go like, huh? They check us out on the website and they say, oh, they're the strategic planning guys. And then they already have like a notion that if you see consultants coming in to help with strategic planning, that these are bad things and that bad outcomes are about to happen. Have you had
literally this week we're doing, and this is not public information, but James, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm gonna call one out on you, but we're doing a large strategic planning session for a university, big process, and there's a lot of conflict within the organization. I won't tell you who it is. And we're doing this session, one last stakeholder session. We've had 11 of them so far. We're doing our 12th one, and we're providing the opportunity for these folks to contribute. So we are, along with the university, saying, we want to hear from you. We know you have concerns. It's important to us that we're on the same page. You follow so far, Francis? Like, we're doing all this stuff.
Yeah, the right things.
The meeting is coming up in a week and a half. The invite goes out yesterday or 2 days ago. Late last night, somebody replies all, and there's like 20 or 30 people in this invite saying, the only thing it says, how much are these consultants being paid? And so like I sit there with my colleague and we say, like, what do we do with this? But it really speaks to what you're talking about, because this person is more concerned, or their concern is us as consultants or external people getting paid money versus us coming in to provide them a platform to talk, to try to help make their lives and works better, to be able to help them be successful and have their shared outcomes, and to like actually make sure they feel heard. They have a past experience that they've either hired consultants that were overpriced, that they should be getting money instead of somebody else. Just like the everything that's loaded into that question just shows the mentality that my team and I are going to be walking into next week, having that conversation with people who are in the organization saying they want change.
Yeah, I had a variation on the theme, similar to that, a university, but they actually had people on staff who were pretty sure they could do a better job than we could at a lower cost. Now, for all I know, they could have, but the CEO was very smart and said, well, I want you in the retreat, in a seat. I don't want you out of the seat facilitating. I want you to be a participant. So that was how he diffused the whole sort of move to displace us with, inside expertise, which also can happen in companies. I don't recommend it. And it's not because I like to get paid, but in terms of the approach, I believe that we bring an outside perspective, and I'm sure you do, that actually is neutral. And that neutral approach helps. We can say things that people who are on the inside can't say. It's just as simple as that.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I mean, if we think of Joanne for a second, like that's in her case, she could be so focused on trying to corral everybody that she's not able to participate as well, which, maybe her participation is really what's needed. Like, so her potential biggest impact would be as a participant versus as a facilitator. And that might help her move it forward.
Right. Exactly. She could Maybe she thinks that outsiders should be used.
Just reach out to Framework Consulting; they'll set you up.
SME Consulting, reach out to SME in Canada. They're good at this kind of thing. But anyway, the overall problem is that she wants the strategic plan to be used, to be implemented. The company is investing time and effort, and usually there's a lot at stake. They're not doing this just because they have some spare time on their hands. And as she goes through the process, she starts to get a little bit anxious, because she senses that some of the same resistance is probably still there. People remember that, oh yeah, we're doing it again, like the last two times. We're going to waste our time again. And her stakeholders, they have that tone in their voice as if to say, you wasted our time twice, and now you're three times the charm. They're hinting that. So in essence, they're really playing that sort of villain role, but she's responding to it because she's human. This is not an intellectual exercise only. This is a social exercise. They're real people who have real emotions around this, and she probably thinks, I'm not the only person going through this. In my company, doesn't everyone who has to sponsor a strategic planning effort, everyone must deal with engagement and involvement? Or am I wrong about that, Anthony? What do you think?
If I understand the question, so does everybody going through this process need to get others engaged in the organization? So
yeah, all the Joans.
In my experience, I'll say yes and no. So I'll call it depends. Yeah. So if we look at a bunch of different structures, let's say there's a small business that has just an executive team and staff. Mm-hmm. In that case, I would say stakeholder engagement is relatively minimal. You could have a larger organization with a lot of staff. You might need to do more stakeholder engagement. You might have a board and a large organization, in which case stakeholder engagement up. You might be a not-for-profit organization that has external partners and stakeholders, and so stakeholder engagement would be advised, but technically not required. And so it really depends on what stage of the organization you're at. In Joanne's case, while let's say she's in an SME, she doesn't need to do stakeholder engagement. She doesn't need to talk to these people, but it's clear that there's an issue. So it would be wise, in I believe our opinion, to be able to talk to those people both on the front end and on the back end of the planning process to get their perspectives on the organization. And I'll say, so that the plan isn't happening to them, but with them. And I think that's the big distinction and the big benefit of being able to do stakeholder engagement, is pulling people into the plan, whether the stakeholder engagement is prior to the planning or as part of the implementation.
Right. Okay. That gets into some of the solutions, which we'll jump into in just a few minutes. So we'll, for the sake of sort of agitating the problem to death, there's some, I know there's some Joannes who don't even see this angle of the problem, because they see this as a kind of a logical activity. And if they persist in their opinion, and there's some CEOs who believe that this is just like handing down any other kind of directive, that all we're going to have to do is just tell people what to do. So getting them engaged is kind of like, it's not so much of a big deal. And unfortunately, if they don't take a sort of enlightened view of this, what happens is that how many, I won't ask you because I wouldn't answer the question, but we know of other consultants, right, who have done lots of work, produced a copious document, and it sits on a hard drive gathering bits and bytes, and it's never implemented, even though people have done a lot of hard work, a lot of money has been spent on these consultants, right? A lot of effort has been put in, and a lot of sort of personal, emotional kind of input. Because as we said, this is not just an intellectual activity, it's a social one as well. And it doesn't happen. And sometimes it just lands oddly. And at the end of it, a Joanne says, what did I not do the last 2 years, which I guess she's doing. So she's doubting herself. And there's some companies that say, well, you know what, we won't even do strategy because we'll just deal with life as it comes, because whenever we do strategy, nothing happens. So why would we just continue doing stuff that doesn't work for us? Instead, we'll just do things differently and just kind of. So there's some who would say that they're not going to do it. Some say that they're afraid that it's not going to happen. They're so afraid that they decide not to do it. And or sometimes I've seen a CEO just disappear for a weekend and come back with a strategy, and they think that that's the answer. But these are all fearful kind of responses to the thing not working. Have you seen similar kinds of odd kind of setups?
Well, I was going to ask you the same thing, and I kind of preface it by saying, there was the people who are disengaged or people that are going opposite. And at least from my perspective, I've seen CEOs that don't want the team to be engaged. They don't, because, at least in my experience, they don't want to spend the time, money, energy to communicate. So that they don't see the investment in doing like the full work worthwhile. There's like checking the box of creating a document, and then there's doing the full work of getting buy-in. But like, Francis, what have you seen in terms of, those roadblocks from the top in terms of getting engagement and putting resources?
They see it like a planning exercise. But we're sort of getting to that. This is not just a planning exercise that you get an expert to do. So I've had people who say, come in and write our strategic plan, and that's in an RFP. You get those too, right?
And yes, like, but we don't respond to RFPs.
Right. You read it and you're like, what? You want me to come in and write the document for you? And in their world, there's nothing strange about doing this, because the purpose of the exercise is the document. It's this intellectual activity. And even better, we get a couple of university professors to come in and do a whole bunch of, we get McKinsey or Bain or whoever, and they come and do a study and pay them $1 million, and they bring in examples from Singapore and from Ghana and from every country, and they do all this worldwide analysis that you can't afford to do. And they come up with the perfect answer. And they've done all the intellectual work to come up with the perfect answer. And they see the process as again, an intellectual exercise, and the result of the process is a plan. Does that ring a bell?
Well, like, I'll share with you one metaphor that that often used. I did a lot of training with Landmark, so I'll ask you, Francis, if to get healthy, what are the two things that you need to do if you want to get healthy or get in better shape?
Lose weight and exercise more.
Exercise, eat right. You and I know that. Yeah, you said it.
I knew the answer.
Yeah, but we know that intellectually.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that I'm not going to eat half a cake for dessert, even though I'm trying to get healthy. And so knowing doesn't make any difference.
Right.
And that's why, in my experience and yours, it's like the ability to get to the heart of the issue and to understand it viscerally versus a document. Again, not a solution, but the shifting in perspectives, as you had shared, is so important. Knowing is not enough. You could write the best plan. They could write the best plan. The difference is that if the client or the organization does it themselves, they get it in their head and something switches. And that's why it's important for guys and gals like you and I to be able to support teams with that. Or if you're doing it by yourself, to have your team work through it versus you over a weekend jotting down notes.
Right. Maybe what you're tell me if this is what you're saying is that there's an experience that happens when you're planning a strategy, that if you're not, let's call it a transformational experience. By the way, I'm a Landmark graduate and big time proponent and brought it to Jamaica, all kinds of stuff. Landmark. Cool. But if you, and maybe that's why we vibe so well together. We didn't even know this until here we are. We're doing everything just for that, because we're discovering that online. But if you see strategic planning as a a dusty, dry, logical, intellectual thing, as opposed to, let's use the word, it's a transformational process.
Mm.
If you see it as a transformation, if you have a clue that every successful strategy involves a transformational element, then, and you knew what that meant, then you would think of the entire thing very, very differently. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, that raises the stakes a whole lot, because we don't get hired to come transform. We're there to do strategic planning, and there's a whole bunch of people out there who don't do any strategic planning that has any transformation. They don't use the T word. Am I wrong, or?
I mean, it depends how. I'll say it depends in my experience, because some people aren't looking for a transformational experience. They're looking for an incremental experience. But I think that is potentially for Joanne. I'm not saying it is, but potentially, as I look at the problem, if everybody is so focused on the operational stuff, the doing, they forget about the why, the outcome. So it's just doing a bunch of stuff versus trying to get to a result. And so it occurs as work or more work versus what's in it for all of the respective stakeholder groups to do this process. What's in it for them? I have a saying that so far I haven't heard anybody copy, which is great, is that the benefit of the future needs to be greater than the pain of change. Benefit of the future needs to be greater than the pain of change. And so if the team... There we go. You can steal it if you'd like. Borrow. Perfect. But, if people don't see something worthwhile enough for themselves, then they won't change. They won't do the work that's required to get there. And so creating the idea of positive change, Francis, I think is like what you were kind of hinting at, is, what's in it for them? What is the T word, the transformation that they want? And how can Joanne use strategic planning as the tool to get them there? If you want more money, strategic planning will help. If you want more responsibility, strategic planning will help. If you want better work-life balance, strategic planning will help. But it's about customizing that. And again, not to solve it, but to be at the inquiry of what are the drivers of each respective stakeholder or stakeholder group.
Boy, that's something else, because it says that Joanne's mindset going into the process is going to shape the process.
100%.
And if she doesn't have if she goes in with the baggage of the prior two efforts, and all she's trying, is you drag the stuff from the past into the future, and then the future is a mess as a result.
I was just about to say it. That's awesome.
Yeah. I know, because we're on the same vibe here. It pollutes what you're trying to do, and I think that deserves a ding as well, because she needs her own transformation in order to lead this process effectively and get the buy-in that she wants to have at the end. Because if she has the wrong context, she's screwed. She'll screw it without knowing. She'll mess it up without even knowing that that's what she's doing, by just the way that she's holding it. Wow. Okay. So if she doesn't have a change in the way she's thinking, like she may, try some solutions, like, again, she might bring in consultants to say, okay, they'll guarantee implementation. I remember in the call before, you said, oh, they could bring in coffee cups, give out swag and T-shirts, and do a bunch of razzmatazz. And I had a client who she rode it might not have been a Harley, but a motorcycle on the stage, to kind of generate some excitement for the troops and get some buy-in to the strategy. She might send a lot of emails. Those are the kind of things that, if you aren't thinking at this transformative level, you might think that kind of pixie dust does actually do something. But I think you might agree it doesn't, huh?
I have a saying that is probably not fair in 2023 or 2024, I guess, is Utah Jazz basketball. It's ugly but effective. I always focus on efficacy. Are we getting the outcome that we want? And if it's not going to get the outcome, why waste the time? Now, the issue that creates is that if we're not sure about the outcome, then how will we know what to do? And I think it kind of speaks to one of the issues is some organizations are unclear about what they really want out of the process. So they go through the motions versus saying, hey, here's what's in it for me. Okay, it's in it for me to get a promotion, but does my board of director care if I get a promotion? In fact, they probably don't want me to get a promotion because then it's more money. So how do you align the interests so that everybody has something in it for themselves that's worthwhile? John Maxwell has a saying, a leader with no followers is just going for a walk. And so, needing to make sure that people are following the leadership. Otherwise, a leader's not leading anything. And so how do you get people to follow is the question. And then as Joanne is working through this, what does she need to do to get all of those folks above, below, beside her to follow where she's going in this initiative, wherever that endpoint is?
But I'm going to guess that given our background in transformation work, that we would probably think to ourselves, oh, Joanne, you need a transformation before you start leading this process. But if Joanne doesn't know what a transformation is, then it'd be tricky for us to tell her that. But we could want it for her, because that's what will generate the kind of followership that you're talking about, right? Which is authentic. It's about the future. It's not about you, the individual. It's about some vision that you could create in the company, that we could create together. That for her to create that kind of followership, she may need to confront some things for herself first. And then if she doesn't get that kind of followership as she starts, again, thinking transformationally, there's another question for her to ask is, geez, why am I not able to tap into people's dream for the best things that they want for themselves?
I might even take it a level further and make it worse, is that she might have all of those skills and there might be other factors in the organization playing against her. Maybe she is, a VP of HR. I don't think we talked about what her role is. And maybe the CEO is ineffective and creating a roadblock. Maybe there's a toxic culture that is causing the problems. We have an organization that walked into their strategy session and their culture was really, really bad, and they were able to turn it around through this. But really getting at the source of, what are those risks? What are those impediments? What are those challenges? And unfortunately for many of our listeners in the Jump Lead podcast, it doesn't occur as them. It occurs as someone else. And so the question is, what do you, the listener, need to do to overcome challenges that might be external to you as you move forward through this process?
Right. I suspect that Joanne knows some of this at some level, but let's suppose she doesn't have a coach, right? So she doesn't have a background in being introspective. So these things are happening around her, and she knows, she's done this before. So this isn't her first rodeo. So she knows who the problem children are. She knows who the resistors are. She knows who the naysayers are, and she knows who kind of where it would come from. And this is the third time around, and she doesn't have any kind of plan that we know of to deal with it. So she's scratching her head, thinking, those people in IT, they're so against everything about the future. They don't want us to waste any time and money thinking about the strategy. They just want us to give them more money so that they could work on the backlog of past items that are supposed to be done. So they're stuck in some place. She's noticed it, but she doesn't have the tools to deal with it. I saw you had an aha. Go ahead.
Finish what you're finishing, and then I'll tell you what.
No, that was it. That's it. That's it. Yeah.
Go ahead. So what I heard was Joanne is saying IT has this problem. These problem children have this problem, and it's in my opinion, a huge assumption, or it's a belief. And the beauty of engaging with stakeholders is to ask why. Either why is that the case, or is that truly the case?
Right.
Because, and I can make this joke, I can make this joke as about myself, but if you're married or have been married, and I'm married, and sometimes my wife is upset with me, And I have asked her the dozens of reasons why she's upset with me that I have no idea. And then it turns out it's some obscure reason over here that may or may not have anything to do with me. But I would have never gotten to that point had I not asked what it was. I would have gone through my list of assumptions. And leaders do that typically, or many times, is they assume this person is not answering my emails because they don't respect me, or they're not showing up to my training because they don't care. Meanwhile, someone like Joanne might talk and say, hey, I've been having 10 training sessions and you never showed up. Why? He could say, I take my kids to school Tuesday morning and I just can't go. So meanwhile, Joanne is over here thinking this person doesn't respect me. They don't like me. They don't care about the process. Meanwhile, it's just a scheduling issue. But you never know that until you get curious about why something is or why it's not that. And it's, So
there's like a willingness to engage in questions, in inquiry with people to sort of get at the root of, okay, well, how comes you people don't come to the strategy prep meetings? How come nobody in your department finishes the survey? How come you all don't show up at the focus group? How come you're passing rumors that, my boyfriend works for McKinsey and that's why, you have
and not making it an issue. Like saying, like, genuinely be curious, and then even self-reflecting and saying, hey, what are your own beliefs, assumptions, thoughts versus a truth or a reality.
Right. No, let's imagine that she were to engage in something like this. Let's say she did a transformational program, or she hired a coach and she started to see some of these things happening. She could actually start the retreat or the offsite having some of these resolved, right? In the way that we're sort of defining, but just by asking the question, she starts to get insight. And I know what happens when I ask questions of this nature with an open mind, without an agenda. And just the fact that I'm asking the question has a benefit. I'm sure you've seen that, but what have you seen on your side?
Questions, when answered, lead to more questions. So it's just by asking the question, you're opening up a new pathway for you to reflect and think. And for, like, one of the things, the principles at SMME Strategy is alignment. Like, by asking a question versus projecting a truth, you're bringing two people closer together. And so how can you all share the same perspective? One of the kind of potential issues that I heard for Joanne was, you have the board with their perspective, you have the managers with their perspectives, you have the frontline employees with their perspective. Everybody is seeing a different thing. It's like that image where, like, one person is looking at a 6 and one person is looking at a 9 because they're looking at it from different perspectives. So how can you get everybody to see the same thing by kind of going into that person's vantage? And the more effectively you can do that, then you can put yourself in their shoes, so to speak, and say, oh, now I understand why this strategic planning process could create more work for you. It might look like more work because we're asking you to document all of these processes, but let's take some time and let me show you, or let's discuss how, if we document all of these processes, it'll help you save 20 hours per month. And they'll say, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Now I'm on board. But until you take the time to, like, see things from that person's perspective and try to understand them, there's no chance at getting alignment.
Right. And so asking questions of that nature is a way of creating the alignment that you need for implementation, is what I think you're hinting at. Yes?
I mean, even just to get aligned on a destination through the planning. If we all want to go to 7 different places, the implementation is moot because we're not, I want to go to 100 million, you want to go to 20 million, you want to close down the business. Doesn't matter if we go into implementation because we all don't want the same outcome.
Same thing. Right. So we could start to we already gotten into solutions, actually, because the techniques that we're talking about with respect to these transformational conversations before a retreat, they have a benefit before, during, and after, in the sense that they start to shape the culture of the company. They start to shape the to use a landmark word, listening. They shape the listening. It's a great word, They shape the listening of the folks who are in the company, so that when they then get the survey, or they then need to show up at the offsite, yes, but they need to show up for the focus group. Their minds are already turning, and you've already sort of brought them in alignment with respect to that. This is a question worth asking. Even if you didn't resolve the issue at hand, they might think that you're spending too much money and too much time. Just asking the question at least brings you in alignment with respect to that. This is a question worth asking, and we're not going to step over it or ignore it. We're going to take it seriously, and by taking it seriously, we're going to work on it together. So that actually brings you, even if you, like I said, even if you disagree, you actually agree that we should be talking about the problem. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. It's the first step towards getting alignment is just reflecting on one's perspective. And I think getting back to the very beginning, that's all about getting stakeholder buy-in. Like, you can't get stakeholder buy-in until you understand their perspective and what their needs are. Otherwise, what would they buy into? If you don't understand what their needs are, how can you effectively help them? And that's, you're not asking to check the box. Ideally, is you want them bought in, but they're not going to buy into something that's not good for them. And how do you know what's good for them? They tell you what's good for them, not what you think is good for them. And that, in my opinion, applies to managers, leaders, stakeholder groups, but also employees. How can you help everybody get to wherever they want to go, wherever that might be? And if they're different places, that's okay. That's a whole other conversation, but that opens the door to that. But then at least that person has I asked them, and they have no interest in accomplishing the strategic plan. They told me flat out, because our outcomes are misaligned. Then that person's a great fit to leave the company. And then that, instead of having a person who doesn't want to go with the plan, sabotaging the plan from inside.
Right. So another way in which I'm thinking that it's also transformational is that when someone shares an issue with you, and it's so big that they think they need to leave the company because there's such a big misalignment between whatever it may be. The IT thinks you should be investing over here, and nobody else in the company agrees. It's now because they've raised it, an issue for the retreat. So they have an expectation that you're not going to ignore this. I'm thinking of like Southwest Airlines, where according to what I understand, IT had been raising system problems for years, and they kept being, poo-pooed or hush-hushed. And they never got the attention or the budget that they needed to really fix the problems until last year, when, not last year, year before, 2022, they had all the ice storms and millions of people were inconvenienced because of all the cancellations. That their point of view was obviously never properly taken into account by the board. In retrospect, the powers that be were like, oh yeah, we should have, and they didn't. But one thing that asking someone for their point of view and taking it seriously does is it helps build the expectation that you are going to answer the question in the retreat, that you're not going to step over it, that you're going to actually deal with it. And then there'll be a moment of reckoning after the retreat when they'll come to you and say, what happened? Well, we tried, we did our best, but, and the IT guy is like, what the heck? The place is going to fall apart. And so it sets in place this kind of motion. And I think let's say that we're into solutions now, that during the retreat and after the retreat, the expectation is that the transformational conversation in the beginning will have a result. What do you think of all that?
I mean, and so, as we kind of wind down our time here, I think that is one of the potential risks with stakeholder engagement, with talking to people, because it opens up the door to people having it's not a request box. And I think that it's about considering all the perspectives. And that's the challenge with strategic thinking, is you have to choose what to do and what not to do. But when you engage stakeholders, it's important to set the expectation. You are not giving us a to-do list. We want to hear your perspective. We are going to take that perspective and use it as part of our planning. There's going to be some stuff we do. There's going to be some stuff we don't do, but it is not a request box. And then to your point, Francis, is around there's going to be certain things that come up recurring. Well, you may want to put more weight to that. And that's the then onus on the strategic planning team to take all of that insight, decipher it, and figure out, hey, what of these are must do's, nice to do's, can't do's, won't do's. And then the critical part, we haven't talked about solutions, is the rolling it back out, is to close the loop with those people and say, we heard you. Here's what we heard. Here's what we're going to do about it. Here's what we're not going to touch right now or not ever. And just to make sure that those people are respected for their perception. But if you don't close the loop, that could be a major risk if you do stakeholder engagement.
Right. I think actually we actually touched on lots of solutions. We just interwove them through. What's interesting about the conversation is that we were thinking of talking about implementation issues before, during, and after the offsite, right? But we've really only gotten to before. So I have a reason to invite you back. And in the next time around, in our next recording, next 2 recordings, so I'm going to book you twice, okay? Let's talk about what you do during the offsite itself, during the retreat. So assuming that you've done a bunch of things before, what do you do to ensure implementation during? And then I'll invite you back a third time for what do you do to ensure implementation after? So we have like...
We might have to do these in person, just saying, Francis.
Go for like 4 hours.
It's just, I could use a trip to go visit you, but no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to the next time we can talk through.
Yeah, how can folks hear more about you and more from you?
Awesome. Check me out on LinkedIn, Anthony C. Taylor on LinkedIn. SME Strategy Consulting is our company, SMEstrategy.net. And then the Strategy and Leadership podcast, where we talk more about this stuff, and then YouTube as well. But love talking about this stuff. And just, Francis, truly, it's been such a fun pleasure. And Joanne, I hope this helps you move forward with what you're working on.
She thanks us both. Folks, keep listening. There's some more to come. I want to tell you about our next episode coming up here at the Jump Leap Long-Term Strategy podcast. So keep listening. And here's a clip from our next episode. You're in charge of implementing your company's new strategic plan. It includes some brilliant new ideas which should shake up your industry and even introduce the world to a brand new category of products and services. But you are a bit wary because prior strategic plans barely made it off the PowerPoint pages. They weren't implemented due to a common complaint. No one had time. You have every reason to be worried, but what should you do about the problem? Tune into this episode to join me in tackling this wicked problem from 2 perspectives at once: task management and strategic planning. And if you like the work we're doing, feel free to follow us at our website, strategyconf.fwconsulting.com, or like or leave a comment on one of the popular podcast apps, such as Stitcher or iTunes. This is Francis Wade, and I'm signing out from the Jump Leap Long-Term Strategic Planning podcast. See you later.